the torrent of drones, missiles and bombs which has dominated the periphery of Iran since the 28th of February. Where do you see this heading?
The opportunity to be able to degrade and as far as possible destroy their capability to continue to do that is an important objective.
The Omani negotiators who were meeting at the very time the first bombs fell and the deal was about done. How do we justify an unprovoked assault under international law? You can destroy things from the air. You can't build a new government from the air. There was much talk of regime change when this action happened, but they're not able to deliver that.
Its objective was, as they were sitting down to talks, is to have them abandon their nuclear program, to walk away from their ballistic missile capabilities, and to end their support of their proxies in the region who are destabilising.
Finally, you and I, how do we shield ourselves and our friends, other neighbours, from the consequences of this ongoing conflict?
I would think that the end of these hostilities is probably not that far away. And if that happens as a consequence of being able to remove one of the most destabilising elements in the Middle East for a more stable future of the Middle East, well, that's got to be a plus.
Thank you very much, and delighted to see you all. I'm excited by this entire concept of next NXT and seeing all of you from a large number of countries. I've forgotten the exact number, but it's great to have you here in Delhi. And we're really privileged to have with us the redoubtable Scott Morrison. He was joking to me that now that he's no longer Prime Minister, he's happy to talk about anything. But we're going to focus as much as possible on the Indo-Pacific, which is, of course, an area of great interest to both our countries. But before we got there, I mean, I will call him very respectfully Mr. Morrison, but you all know that he was widely known, even in his own country, as ScoMo. And right. On a memorable YouTube interaction, he demonstrated his proficiency at making ScoMosas. Now, you've got to tell us who taught you that trick.
Well, it's a bit of self-taught, and it's something I've been doing for many years. I actually had breakfast today, so it's something I love about Indian culture, and it isn't just cricket and movies and all of these sorts of things.
It's high carb, as you probably know.
It is very high carb, particularly the way I make it.
Well, I'm looking forward to the time when we can share a samosa together, Mr. Morrison, especially one from your hands. But when you're in Delhi, you'll get various and perhaps not of as good a quality as you will produce in the Australian outback. But we've got you here today at an interesting and challenging time in the world. And though we will have to move to the Indo-Pacific, which is where our main focus is, it's difficult to escape the reality of what's going on in the world today. The torrent of drones, missiles and bombs, which has dominated the periphery of Iran since the 28th of February. Today we're now in the 13th of March. That's 13 full days of conflict that have gone on in the region. Number one, where do you see this heading? And number two, what are the consequences for our countries, yours, mine, and the broader region?
Well, the first point I'd make is, regardless of what plans any of us might have when we're in government, events and opportunities usually come crashing in and will start determining what you might have to deal with more immediately. But that said, what's happening in the Middle East, I don't think is off strategy, particularly from the point of view of the United States. I mean, for more than almost 50 years, what Iran has been doing in the Middle East has at best been a nuisance and worse been terrorising their neighbours and the rest of the world. It is hardly a positive regime, and it is a regime that has threatened everything from oil supplies to the livelihoods and indeed lives of people right around the world, and in particularly in the United States and elsewhere. So the opportunity to be able to degrade and as far as possible destroy their capability to continue to do that is an important objective. For which, particularly after the 12-day war, there was an opportunity to do that in partnership with Israel, and that's what we're seeing played out. A window of opportunity has presented itself, and I think the United States, together with Israel, is taking that opportunity. What I think is different to what we've seen in the past, and I know there has been a plethora of narratives that have sat around this particular conflict. But if you look back in the strategy documents of the United States, you will see that there is not a proclivity to want to be engaged in the sort of boots on the ground extended conflicts that we've seen in the past. We saw that, I know it's not the same thing, but in Venezuela, where there was a very quick action, the message was sent, the issue was dealt with. This is a far more complicated issue. It is one involving a far larger regime with a greater military capability. And you will see the United States, together with Israel, seeking to degrade that capability as far as possible and as much as possible up until the point in which further escalation requires them to go effectively off strategy and involve boots on the ground and things of that nature. So while regime change would be desirable, I don't think we can set it up as an objective of success of these strikes. It may well come in the future because of the weakening of the regime, but to expect it to happen within 2 weeks of strikes, well, it'll be the first time that has ever happened in world history. So let's be careful about how we judge the success criteria. I would say the United States, together with Israel, has done more to deal with the menace of Iran than any previous administration.
Fair enough, but Australia has traditionally been a strong upholder of the principles of international law. Surely they've all been breached in initiating this conflict. It's a violation of the Charter, a violation of the sovereignty of Iran. There's been this case for so-called preemptive self-defense, but then the Omani negotiators who were meeting at the very time the first bombs fell, they've been saying that the Iranians had already conceded completely that they would not have nukes, they would not enrich, they'd have zero stockpiles, and all they were waiting for was structured sanctions relief from the US, and the deal was about done. Now, if that's true, then preemptive self-defense also doesn't make any sense. How do we justify an unprovoked assault under international law?
I don't think it is true, is the point. And I'm not surprised that that narrative has emerged afterwards. That has been the narrative, and that has been what we've seen in the Middle East for decades. It's throwing a...
This mic, I think, needs some adjustment, folks, because we're losing Mr. Morrison's voice periodically. But yeah, maybe hold it closer, sir. Yeah.
I'll try that again.
No, I think we need either a change.
What we've seen in the Middle East, I'm just trying to say...
They're coming to you with an alternative mic.
What we've seen in the Middle East, I think, is the use of international systems, the use of international norms as a cover to enable illiberal terrorist regimes like Iran do what they've been doing. The President of the United States is not an orthodox politician, as we were talking about, and to expect him to be behaving in an orthodox way would be unrealistic. And so where international norms and systems are being used to continue what has been an abominable practice, then how on earth can we support them? How on earth can we support them when, if you go back to October 7 and what Iran was able to support with the worst day of massacre of Jews since the Holocaust in a single day. I mean, if we're talking about a breakdown of the international order, that's a pretty good place to start. And so we are dealing with a criminal regime. And when you put it in that context, then I think the United States sought to broker a deal on nuclear, but the Iranians are never going to give that up. They're never going to give it up. And the President called it out, as did Bibi.
One other question on this is, let's take your point as given. The other aspect of this, Mr. Morrison, is that we all know you can destroy things from the air. You can't build a new government from the air. There was much talk of regime change when this action happened, but they're not able to deliver that. And we've got the son of the slain supreme leader now in his place. What has been achieved with all this destruction? Will you really be able to put an end to this regime just from the air and from these assaults?
Well, I don't think that is the objective, certainly in the course of the airstrikes, and I don't think it ever was. Its objective was, as they were sitting down to talks, is to have them abandon their nuclear program, to walk away from their ballistic missile capabilities, and to end their support of their proxies in the region who were destabilising. All three of these things had been consistently rejected for decades, including most recently. That was the objective. And what has added to it quite successfully was pretty much the destruction of their conventional naval capability, which has occurred. And so what we have seen is the most significant degrading of Iran's military capabilities in any time during the revolutionary regime. Now, regime change would be better, but we know how that would have to be achieved, and that isn't a path that I think anyone would want to encourage the United States to take. I find it a bit odd that in some of the commentary that I've seen, whether in the US or elsewhere, they're almost saying, well, you have to achieve regime change, and you have to go in and put some boots on the ground to achieve that, but if you did that, that would be a big mistake. I think it's a very convenient way, and I often see this in the commentary on current administration behaviour, that if it had been anyone else than Donald Trump actually doing this, then I suspect there may be a different way of assessing what the success criteria is. I mean, the President could walk away today, if he chose to, and declare massive victory. The idea that Iran is stronger today than it was a year ago is absurd. It is a deeply weakened state. And that was true before these attacks. How do I know that? Well, you only got to look at the stance taken by Gulf partners when it came to how they may continue to engage with Israel. The idea of the Abraham Accords, for example. I think the Saudis now would see Iran as a diminished threat, and as a result, the idea of a closer relationship with Israel to hedge against Iranian threat, well, that's moved on. Iran is not what it was, and there's one reason for that. And it's still happening now.
It's still happening. Finally, you and I mean, Australia and India, both of us, neither of us is in power in government anymore, but we both follow national policies very closely. We both need trade. And though we're not overwhelmingly dependent on trade through the Straits of Hormuz, we're both significantly dependent on it. How do we shield ourselves and our friends, other neighbors, from the consequences of this ongoing conflict? And do we not have a common interest in seeking it ended as soon as possible?
Well, the short answer to that is yes. And I would think that the end of these hostilities is probably not that far away, and the President has been hinting as much in his most recent statements. And the new Supreme Leader is, I understand, severely injured as we speak. And I suspect both Israel and the United States will seek to maximise what they can continue to achieve in the time that they have remaining. But I think there is a limit to that time. I think it's dangerous to put a specific time on it, because that only shows your hand to your adversaries, and they may seek to wait elements of that out. But when we're talking about things that are going to affect the world for the next 10 years, the Straits of Hormuz could be open in 3 weeks. And yes, that means that in the short term there's been a tremendous impact. But this can rebalance quickly, not immediately, but it can rebalance quickly. And if that happens as a consequence of being able to remove one of the most destabilising elements in the Middle East for a more stable future of the Middle East, well, that's got to be a plus. So yes, we do, and I'd be shocked if there was no consciousness of this, that the Americans didn't understand that this would have an impact on oil prices. Of course they did. The question is, for how long and to what end, and the balance of assessments about when you cease those operations and go into a different phase.
Right. Well, the prices have been seesawing, as you've seen. 65 before the war, went as high as 120, came down again below 100. We'll have to see, but as you say, it all depends on when it ends, and we'll certainly want to hope, I think, this happens sooner rather than later. Let me take you back to the Indo-Pacific, and to the region. You've been Prime Minister when in some ways the Quad was achieving its peak. I think the first Quad summit was on your watch. If I'm not mistaken, there was a sense that all 4 countries were equally committed to an emerging architecture of cooperation amongst us that was interested in keeping the sea lanes of communication open and in preserving a certain strength, a certain force that might, this is where you may correct me, please, that might have been seen by some as an effort to counterbalance the growing menace of China. How would you rephrase that?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't rephrase it. It may not be the public declaration around these things, but undoubtedly the four major maritime powers of the Indo-Pacific in constant dialogue from the leader level down, with everything from Malabar exercises to demonstrating, I think, through public good diplomacy and support in the region by democracies. When I was there, it was about COVID vaccines. Today, it's about humanitarian assistance in crises and so on. I think that remains an important part of the Quad. But I think the Secretary Rubio, with Jaishankar and others after the change of government in the United States, has refocused it, I think, well. I think the Quad was getting a little unwieldy, and I think refocusing that agenda with a strong security base, but understanding economic security as part of security, keeping the focus on maritime domain, keeping it on critical minerals and areas and critical technologies where the four can work together. I think space is an important area where the four bring unique capabilities and contributions, which can be part of that. But it's very important, I think, for the Quad to be meeting again. I think there's been a range of practical and other issues over the past year which has prevented that. That's unfortunate. But I think at a working level, the Quad has busily carried on with its tasks. Foreign ministers have continued to meet, but it is important, having been a founding member of that as a leader, for those leaders to meet. They don't sit there and work over communiques and all the diplomatic tool-making that goes on at a lot of these summits. What they have to do is candidly talk about the issues that are going on now. I think there's the need for a greater focus on the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific. I think the security in the Indian Ocean, the malevolent and growing influence of China in the Indian Ocean is something that means, I think, a great deal. But it also means a great deal to Australia. It means a great deal to the other maritime powers in the Indo-Pacific. So I look forward to that happening. I think it will. I think there have been practical issues that have distracted. Obviously, there have been issues around trade and other things that have diverted leaders' attention, but I do commend India and all the Indo-Pacific countries for the way they responded to that, stayed focused on task, didn't get caught up in a sense of offence, got the job done, and let's get back to the relationships.
But if you were still PM of Australia, how would you react to the indefinite postponement of the Quad summit by Mr. Trump's failure to agree to attend one that was due in November of last year? You've had 5 summits, I think, or 6 summits, pretty much without any, ever since COVID, there's been a summit every year without any glitch, and suddenly the summit that was due last year never happened because Mr. Trump didn't want to come, and it's still not been scheduled. How do Australia and Japan react to that?
Well, President Biden did the same thing with Australia and pulled attendance at one of those as well. So that isn't the first time that's occurred. And that was because of shutdown issues on that occasion. So, you know, when you're working with the United States, these things happen from time to time. The issue is what is their level of genuine practical interest and commitment to the Indo-Pacific? And when you read their national security strategy and their national defence strategy, the Indo-Pacific and China are almost the unspoken word on every single page. It is clear that they understand that as this region, as the defining region for the future of geopolitics and the world order. And the fact that he would prioritise, as I think he's wise to, the meeting with Xi Jinping, which is in a few weeks, that is providing a very important safety valve for the tensions that are there. I suspect those meetings will stay pretty much focused on things within their red lines, not beyond them. They'll focus on trade. They'll talk about, you know, Boeing jets and sorghum and soybeans and all of that sort of thing, and NVIDIA chips and so on. But on the broader issues, I think that dialogue is keeping a stability. Now, that's an opportunity for the rest of the Indo-Pacific, because whether it's the Quad, indeed whether it's AUKUS from our point of view, whether it is the work that is done bilaterally, I mean, the relationships between each of the Quad partners bilaterally, I think is as important as their combined relationship. And I'll make a few remarks about this later, but Australia worked very hard under my time to take the India-Australia relationship to a whole new level, and that's been maintained. But equally, we did the same thing with Japan. The United States was doing similar things with Japan under several administrations, but I can tell you who drove it. It was Shinzo Abe. And so the knitting together of the network and map of alliances, like-minded partnerships, whether it's the Philippines, whether it's digital trade agreements with Singapore, whether it just goes on, and ensuring that where you can, you're supporting the strategies we're seeing played in Taiwan to defend themselves should they have to, then the Indo-Pacific is getting stronger from a point of deterrence, not weaker.
But when you were PM, you endured a bit of a trade war with China. If I'm not mistaken, they tightened up on beef imports from Australia, and you had some How did you work through that?
We held our ground. We held our ground and said no more. I think one of the issues, particularly in Southeast Asia, is for too long, and this goes back to the Obama administration, when China continued to press out in the South China Sea, turning atolls into installations which are now effectively stationary aircraft carriers. Unless you say stop, and unless you say no, then they will continue to encroach. And I think India understands that as well as we do. And that's why I think it is important to collectively be very clear about these things and to hold your ground when you have to. And yes, was there pain? There was. But ultimately, we were able to find alternative markets for our barley, and lobsters got a bit cheaper in Western Australia for people to have at Christmas. And I always thought these things would eventually come down. We took them through the WTO. The following government suspended those actions, but those illegal trade sanctions eventually came off. But I don't think the world can go, and particularly China, can go too long without drinking Penfolds red wine or Grange. The Wuhan Pinot is nowhere as good as what we offer out of South Australia.
All right. Well, look, we are running out of time, and I have one last question for you before you get a chance to lay out your vision of the world to the audience here. And my last question is very simple. How do you see the future of the Australia-India relationship? And I won't talk cricket at all. I'm as much of a cricket tragic as any Australian, but I think we're looking forward to that a little later next year. What do we do politically, geopolitically, commercially, trade-wise, the whole lot?
I'm very excited about the relationship. I was when I was in government, and I was thrilled with what we're able to achieve. I'm thrilled that it continues. I think the nexus between Australia and India is incredibly important, not just for the region, but for the Quad, the relationship with other alliances. And I think Australia is in quite a unique position to both comprehend and work with India. I think neither of us effectively threaten each other. I think there's an easy relationship. I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of our institutions and these types of things, but increasingly how we look at the region and what the risks are. I think Australia has and continues to show India a lot of respect, understands that we both need room to have this relationship. We have a much closer binding relationship, alliance relationship with the United States. India has a different history with some partners that we would have nothing to do with. But that doesn't mean that disqualifies the closeness of a relationship. And that's what I certainly had with Prime Minister Modi, a very good friendship, similar to the one I enjoyed with the late Shinzo Abe and his successors. You could have a strong relationship, and I think that we have now got an incredibly solid foundation. And, in the past, it was all about cricket and curries. And that's nice, and it's good soft power things, and it's a lot of fun. And I think, India and Australia set the standard in cricket the world over, and the rest just try and keep up with us. And congratulations on the T20. We had a shocker, but, we had a pretty good series with India not that long ago. But I think it has gone well beyond that now. It is now in security, it's in defence, it's in economics, it's, I hope, more in space, it's in supply chains, it's in all of these things. And I think the Australia-India relationship provides an anchor, a very solid anchor for alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, to which the United States, to which Japan, to which ASEAN and so many others can link to. And so I'd say we're part of the foundation. And that makes me very positive about the future. I'm excited about what's happening here in India, and I think that is going to have a positive flow on for Australia.
Great. Well, I think that's a very positive note on which to I won't say end, but pause this conversation because you're in for a special treat. You'll be hearing from Prime Minister Morrison on his vision of the region. He was gracious enough to agree to conduct the conversation first so that I could head off to the airport, and I will be leaving you. But please focus on the larger message which is going to emerge, particularly, I think, taking off from the last portion of our conversation. With those words, thank you very much, Scott Morrison. Enjoyed that. Thank you all for being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you.